Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today's video is part of a fun Lawn Fawn fan video hop that I'm participating in with a number of other Lawn Fawn fans who have YouTube channels. These are a bunch of seriously talented Lawn Fawn fans and card designers, so I highly encourage you to check out their channels. And the whole list of the different channels that are part of this hop are going to be linked down in my description box below. So if you're new to my channel and you're here for the hop, welcome! My name is Ashley and I make a lot of cards. I post most of my cards on my Instagram account, which is linked down in the description box below, but I also post a lot here on YouTube, so I hope that you stick around and enjoy some of my other videos as well. So the card that I'm making today is a fun interactive card featuring a lot of Lawn Fawn's new Summer 2020 release stamps. The stamps that I'm particularly featuring today are their Ocean Shell-fie stamp for the underwater images and their Crazy Antics stamp set, which is what makes up the cute little beach scene on the top right. So I'm starting by making the pieces that will make up sort of the background of the scene of this card. And to start with, I'm blending 3 different colors of Distress Oxide ink to make this water side of the scene. So the darkest is Chipped Sapphire, the middle is Blueprint Sketch, and the top right is Peacock Feathers. And I just blended them back and forth with my ink blending tools to get that nice blend. I'm then splattering the panel with some white paint, which I just mixed with a little bit of water on an acrylic block and just splattered it out onto the panel with a paintbrush. To make the sand, I'm just taking a white rectangle and blending on 2 different colors of Distress Oxide ink, starting with Vintage Photo as the brown and Scattered Straw as the yellow, and sort of just blending them together to have the Vintage Photo sort of peeking out from behind where the water will be, and Scattered Straw as the rest of the sand. And then I'm giving this panel the same treatment with that white paint just splattered out over the whole thing. So those pieces will become part of the background and I'm just going to set them aside to dry while I color in all of the images here. First I'm stamping out all of the images, and this is a whole bunch of images from those 2 stamp sets. And I'm just stamping them out twice using my Misty tool, and the black ink that I chose for this was My Favorite Things Extreme Black Ink, which is a really nice Copic friendly black ink. And I do find that it works best when you stamp things out twice because it makes the images really nice and crisp. I stamped out all of these images on some Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And this is my favorite cardstock for Copic coloring because it's super bright white and it just allows the Copic markers to blend really smoothly and really nicely. So now that I have all of the images stamped out, I can go ahead and start coloring them in with my Copic markers. I'm not going to go through all of the coloring in this video, but I am going to show you how I color a few of these images just so that you can get an idea of how I do it. Essentially, for most of my images, especially because these ones are so tiny and small, I will just use 2 different colors of Copic markers, a dark shade and a light shade. And how I normally do it is I start with my dark shade, and I add the dark shade to the sections of the image that I think are going to have the most shadow. And then I come in with my light shade, and I blend out where I had applied the dark shade. And this gives a really nice blend with that dimension of having the dark shade in the shadier spots. Some of my images here I am using 3 markers, so I'm using a dark, a middle, and a light shade. And I generally just do that when I find that there's too much contrast between the dark and the light. So if I find that I do kind of need that middle ground to really blend them together, I will add it, but I don't always. In fact, I typically use just 2 shades, especially when the images are small and you just don't really have room for that 3rd shade in the middle. And I find having 2 shades works just fine. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually come back in with the dark shade at the end and add an extra layer of dark. And this almost creates like a faux 3rd shade because once you come back in with the darker shade, it's a little bit darker than where you had originally placed it because it's no longer being blended out, or it hasn't yet been blended out by that light shade. So you can come in with a 2nd layer of dark shade, and that will really accentuate that dark and almost acts as a 3rd shade without really needing one. To color in this basket, I'm just using a couple different shades of brown and just blending them out along those diagonal sort of wicker basket lines. For the matte, I decided to just keep it very classic, picnic matte, red and white. So for the red boxes, I'm again just using 2 shades of red, a dark and a light, and I'm just kind of adding the dark first and the light second. And for the white squares, I didn't want to keep them just plain white, so I added a couple little shadow lines with a very light gray marker, just to add a little bit of extra dimension. I went through and colored all the rest of these little images in a very similar way. So for the chips, again, just using a couple different shades of blue, then a couple different shades of yellow, blending out the dark using a light shade. The last image I'm going to show you coloring here is just this little octopus, which is so cute. And I'm using red to color this little octopus in. So again, I'm coming in with a darker shade and just adding it to where I think the areas with shadow would be. And then when I'm done that, I can come back in with my lighter shade and just blend it out. And what I've kind of learned over all my experience of Copic coloring, and I am by no means an expert, but what I have learned is that I don't need to worry so much about blending out the dark as much as possible. It's okay if it stays as sort of almost like a line. You know, and you can see that distinction between light and dark. It actually adds a nice level of detail and dimension, and it's not such a bad thing. Now with all of my images that I'm coloring, I am coming in with a white gel pen and adding little lines where I think the light would be hitting them, just as little highlights, and I find that this is just a really cute detail. Okay, so now it's on to building the interactive mechanism of this card, and this is what I like to call a swivel pivot. So in order to do this, I took a piece of acetate which I attached to the bottom of the back panel there with a little tiny brad. I'm then attaching that acetate to the pull tab, which is just a piece of white cardstock, with a second brad. So as you can see here, I'm going to slow down the video and you can see the mechanism in action. So you can see that there are two brads there. The one on the bottom attaches the acetate to the card base, and the one on the top attaches the acetate to the pull tab. So what happens is that when you pull the tab back and forth, you can see that that acetate is swinging on a pivot. So it's kind of swinging on an angle as if it's swinging in a circular motion, which is exactly the motion that I wanted. So to kind of finalize this little mechanism, I'm adding some foam all around where the mechanism moves, and this will allow that water panel to be elevated above it and cover it up, while also not interfering with it. So I'm just adding foam all around and kind of trying to figure out where I should add the foam so that it stops that octopus from going too far off the side of the card. So I just kind of shoved a little bit in there so that the octopus hits that foam and stops going backwards, but it also doesn't show outside of that blue. What I noticed is that I had added some foam that showed outside of the blue cardstock, so once I noticed that, I just cut it back. So once I've got everything in place, I'm able to glue that octopus, or actually I use a piece of double-sided tape to adhere the octopus onto the acetate, and then I can cut the leftover acetate off. And you can see that that octopus then just moves back and forth on his little pivot. I just trimmed the edge of the pull tab down so that it peeks out from behind the water, and I can just stamp the little sentiment pull here from another one of Lawn Fawn's little sentiment stamp sets onto that pull tab so that the recipient knows to pull. And when all of that is done, I can then adhere that blue water panel directly over top using some double-sided tape, and then you have the whole mechanism done. Once all that is put together, I'm just gluing down the entire panel onto a card base with some liquid glue. So the mechanism is all done, and now it's time to build the rest of the scene. I'm just taking all of my images here that I had stamped and colored and cut out off camera and just adhering them down to the front of the card. On the top right of the card where the sand is where I'm putting a little picnic scene. And with all of my little picnic themed images, I'm just gluing them straight down to the card base using some liquid glue because I knew that this was where the octopus was going to pivot out, so I didn't want anything blocking the octopus. I'm also gluing a little popsicle into the hand of the octopus, which I think is really cute. So basically he pops out of the water to join the picnic with his little popsicle. So I added a few little mice, the little picnic basket, some ants, and then a few little pieces of food that the mice are eating, and that was sort of how I completed that little scene on the sand there. You can see on the left I had already stamped the sentiment off camera, but I decided that I didn't like the sentiment, so I wanted to change it. So instead, I'm actually going to be embossing the sentiment onto a piece of pearlescent vellum, as you can see here. So I just stamped it out with some Versamark ink, which is a nice sticky ink for embossing, and I'm coating that sentiment in black sparkly embossing powder. This particular powder is actually from Stampin' Up! And it's just a really pretty black sparkly powder, as you'll see in the finished photos. Any excess little bits of embossing powder I just sort of wiped away with my poker tool there, and then I could heat set it with my heat gun, and you can see when I do that the embossing powder melts to this beautiful shiny embossing powder with the pearlescent vellum also being nice and shiny, so everything there is shiny. Now to adhere the strip down to the card, because vellum is see-through, I didn't want to just use liquid glue because I figured you would see that. So what I did was I took a piece of double-sided tape and just adhered it straight to the back of that vellum. And then when I pull the release paper away from that tape, you can just stick the vellum straight down and you don't even notice the adhesive behind it because it's just one even sheet of adhesive. So I did that, and I just trimmed it down so that it would fit on the top of that card there and just tuck in behind the water panel, and then I can trim the other side off from the edge of the card, and it looks like it's just one even panel across the top of the card. I then took a bunch of my water themed images and adhered them all down onto the water part of the card here on the left. And I'm just showing a couple here, sticking down these two little fishies with their parts of the picnic. I used foam squares for some of these guys so that they do stick off a little bit from the front of the card. And to finish off the scene, I can just add in a few other tiny little images that I've stamped out here, just these clouds and a couple shells, and again I'm just sticking these ones down with liquid glue. And once I do this, the whole scene is complete and all of the images have been adhered. The final little detail that I do add to this card is to add a few little bubbles to the water using Tonic Nuvo drops in clear. And once I do that, the card is complete. So this is the card. It looks kind of busy and kind of crazy, but I do like that you get the two sort of different sides of the scene, you know, the water scene on the left and the picnic scene on the right, but really they're all connected in that they're all part of the picnic. And then when you pull on that tab, you get the little octopus coming out to join the picnic as well, which I think is really cute. So thank you so much for watching this video. Again, if you're joining from the hop, please do go down into the description below this video and check out some of the other creators. They're all amazing. I really appreciate that you stopped by here today. If you did like this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and check out my Instagram account, which is linked down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!